I'd like to welcome you to our community Yom HaShoah program and service, brought to you in partnership by the Jewish Federation of Eastern Connecticut and Hadassah's Henny Simon Remembrance. Thank you all so much for being with us this afternoon. Everyone is muted now, and we ask that you place your Zoom on speaker view for the best viewing. It is also best if you move your windows to the right side of your screen. During the slideshow, either gallery or speaker view should be fine. Please note that this program is being recorded. To begin, please welcome Rabbi Ken Alter for the invocation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. On this beautiful day, Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the Universe. On this most solemn of occasions, we open our hearts, minds, and souls to you. As we remember the 6 million, the 11 million, the indifference, and the evil, as we honor the heroes, the martyrs, the survivors, and the victims. We ask you to soothe our souls, to amplify our memories, to strengthen our resolve, and to hear our prayers. We ask for your presence in our midst, for healing, light, and love, to soothe and ease our pain as we commemorate the horrors that were committed not long ago. Please, O Holy One, be gentle with our souls. We ask that you help us to forever remember the stories we hear today. As we encounter throughout time the unthinkable, we ask that these memories be strengthened and never fade, in the hope that those who remember the mistakes of the past will not repeat them. Please, O Holy One, amplify our ability to remember. Above all, we pray for shalom, for wholeness and peace, to be in our midst now and forever. Please, O Holy One, answer our prayers and bring us a world devoid of hatred, filled instead with peace. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will, and may we all say together, Amen.
Amen.
We just celebrated Pesach, a retelling of a critical part of our history. The culture of remembrance is central to Judaism. We remember the good and we remember the bad. And many of us try to extract from these remembrances some meaning or lessons relevant to today. Post-Holocaust Germany has tried to institute a culture of remembrance, a culture specifically of Holocaust remembrance. There are Holocaust monuments, commemorations, and Holocaust museums in Germany. The Nazi Party is outlawed, and publicly denying the Holocaust is a crime. The rise of the National Socialist Party and the history of the Holocaust are required parts of secondary education. In the US, there are also Holocaust museums, monuments, and commemorations, and 16 states mandate Holocaust education. And yet, the extreme right and the hatred of the other are gaining strength in both Germany and in the United States. Anti-Semitic speech has increased dramatically, including by members of our own government. In 2021, worldwide, there were approximately 10 known anti-Semitic incidents daily, half of which occurred in Europe. So many of us are asking, are the lessons of the Holocaust being lost? Today, we will focus on Germany and its culture of remembrance through the eyes of Henny Simon, may her memory be a blessing, and through the eyes of children of survivors, including a documentarian, and through the eyes of German students. Sheila Hurwitz will introduce the participants with a slideshow.
Thank you, everyone. We're going to see a slideshow, which is the roadmap to our conversation. So Marcia, when you're ready, let's have the slideshow. So that was a moving slideshow. We start by asking the question, how have the Holocaust survivors and their families dealt with their loved ones' legacies through remembrances and return to Germany? Surely there are conflicting emotions. How can we trust Germany? And won't painful memories of trauma and loss be stirred up? But is it perhaps cathartic to reconnect with the past and find some closure and even reconciliation? And then we ask, how do German young people today learn about, react to, and incorporate their understanding of the Holocaust into their lives and experiences today? And as Ramona has beautifully expressed, we have this conversation today with the backdrop of the troubled world and the contradictions that is Germany today. Do you know that Germany's Jewish community is the fastest growing Jewish community in the world today? Berlin is attracting thousands of young Israelis, and many Ukrainian refugees are choosing to resettle in Germany instead of Israel. Yet, despite the resurgence of Jewish life in Germany and the years-long attempts of commemoration and conciliation, as Romana has described, there still exists today, side by side with all of that, a frightening resurgence of far-right and neo-Nazi extremism and growing anti-Semitic violence and incidents in Germany. So let's start our conversation with Romana. Romana, as the slideshow told us, and you're well known in our community as a past president of the Federation and active in so much Holocaust education, you are the child of survivors whose extended families, so many of whom perished in the Holocaust, and you returned to Germany 4 times in your life. Tell us the emotional feelings. Did you feel the trauma? Did you feel the pain? What were your feelings of connection? And how were your interactions with the Germans when you were in Germany, those occasions?
Well, the first time I went to Germany was in the 1980s, when I was really privileged to be invited by the administrators of the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, who wanted to increase, enlarge the memorialization that the concentration camp had already had. When the British came to liberate Bergen-Belsen, they found mounds and mounds of dead bodies, and the Germans had put memorials on mounds with notices that say, here lie 600 bodies, or here lie 800 bodies. And these were dramatic, but they didn't tell the real story of Bergen-Belsen. And the administrators were interested in doing that. And I went, and I had mixed emotions about going. I wanted to help them. I wanted the memorialization to be true to the story, particularly the story of the Jews, but other people as well. But I also did feel uneasy. When I was growing up, in my early years, we didn't buy German products. We didn't buy Polish products either. There was a generally uneasy feeling about Germany. My parents didn't demonize them, but there was an uneasiness. And when I went, all of that awkwardness and my skepticism were all there. But what I found at the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp site was a group of mostly young German professionals and volunteers who really sincerely wanted to do something to spread Holocaust remembrance and education. And we exchanged stories, we exchanged family histories, and our initial reserve and skepticism did fade a bit at their obvious sincerity and their determination to take some responsibility for the actions of their families. And then I returned 3 more times, once with Chuck and my parents and other family and the other. So my parents were also surprised that they weren't, when they went back, they were surprised that they weren't filled with hate. We had long before that decided sort of as a family that the children of the people who were active or bystanders in Germany were not to blame for what their parents did. And when my parents went back, they experienced all the sadness and the tragedy. And when they went to visit Bergen-Belsen and later Auschwitz-Birkenau, they were hit with terrible tragedy. In fact, when they went to Auschwitz-Birkenau, they would not let me or any of their family go with them because that was just something so personal to the two of them that they could not share that with anybody else. But the hatred wasn't there.
Okay, thank you, Romana, for your experiences and all of your work in this area. Let's turn now to Emmanuel. Emmanuel Aronson Run. You, Emmanuel, were born at Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem in the years after the war, a child of survivors and a grandchild of Holocaust victims. Both your sets of grandparents were murdered in the Holocaust, as well as an aunt. And you have made it your life's work to chronicle the history of that through your work as a photojournalist, as a movie maker, as an actor, as a lobbyist to get the Holocaust Memorial Day entered in legislation in Germany, and so on. You have done so much. And what impressed me when I talked to you about your history was that you grew up in Jerusalem with so many other children who had no grandparents and didn't know what it was to have grandparents or extended family. And that's an experience of Holocaust survivors' children. But you also had many interactions with Germany. You lived there for a time, you made movies there, you made an Academy Award nominated film, All Jews Out, about the Jews of Göppingen. And you went back to the city of Leer, where your grandparents lived. I want you to tell us about your interactions with German youth, how you came to meet them and see them as students, and as people who helped you with your films. You enlisted them to make your films, and you brought some of them to Jerusalem, to Israel, to Yad Vashem. Tell us about those encounters, Emmanuel.
Okay, thank you very much for setting up this setup to educate so many people who will watch it in the future. And I send you regards from Jerusalem. Schönen guten Abend aus Jerusalem. Shalom, shalom, Yerushalayim. And yeah, I was a filmmaker in Israel and in America and TV producer. 1995, I went to make my first film in Germany. And when in Leer, Ostfriesland, and when I brought survivors to the high school, gymnasium, the students, the high school kids, didn't know anything about the theme. They didn't know anything about the Jews of their town who used to live there. And so I decided I'm going to make films with young Germans. So I made 15 documentaries, always with young Germans who set up the questions, who do the interviews. And so that every viewer, especially young ones, could learn a lot. Then also I wanted to help them with, with the young German generation with reconciliation, because whenever I screen my films in movie theaters or universities or church communities, came to me young Germans, 17 to 25, and they confided with me that they have problems, psychological, because they don't know exactly what their Nazi grandparents did or didn't do, and they suffered. I realized it was a big problem all over Germany, and I decided I'm going to heal them. So from the first film, first town in Leer, I took a group of youngsters with me to Israel, to meet survivors, to hug them, to go to Yad Vashem on Holocaust Memorial Day, and I made 6 films. When those films played all over Germany, thousands of those young Germans flocked to Israel to do exactly what they saw in my film, to hug survivors, go to Yad Vashem, to the country, and learn about Jews and Judaism and the Holocaust from many, many survivors. And so that's what I've done. And I must thank German President Horst Köhler, who told me, who invited me to Hamburg Theater, 2,000 people, where he told me, he said, Herr Rund, Mr. Rund, it's nice that somebody is doing something for a young generation, and it must be you, Mr. Rund from New York. So I said, thank you, Mr. President. My family in Germany before the war used to help a lot the society. And so I worked also on 8 feature films, all in German about the theme. And as a filmmaker, there were many students who wanted to work with me. So of course, working for me as interns. For 1 year, they learned a lot about just everything. And then they started to make films and spread the word further. And I keep making films, and I lecture a lot about all those themes. And yeah, and that's more or less what I've contributed to Germany and young Germany. And I brought, as you said, I brought Germany to the Oscars with Alle Juden raus, that I filmed in Göppingen by Stuttgart. And I initiated the International Holocaust Remembrance Day, the 27th of January. And the last 27th of January in the Bundestag, the parliament in Berlin, was my protagonist for my 3 films that I filmed in Göppingen and in Theresienstadt camp. And she was speaking at the Bundestag. And then when we were in New York, we were invited to the UN International Holocaust Remembrance Day also to speak over there. And anybody would like to know more, they just have to Google Emanuel Rund, R-U-N-D, and they'll find out, and they can always contact me if they have any questions or if they want to tell something. And by the way, whenever I screen my films in Germany, 1 film at a time, I used to hang posters of all of my other films in the lobby. And I put my name, my address, and phone number in there. I told the crowd, listen, I came here for a dialogue, especially with you, young people, and any one of you who would like to call me, tell me something, ask me something, and they did call, and so that was beautiful dialogue like that. And yeah, and I developed an archive that is in Germany, all in German, that will serve the Germans for the next generations. All about
Thank you. Thank you.
things.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Emmanuel. We appreciate your work so much, and your contact is in our program notes. Everyone got a PDF of our program notes that tells all about our participants, and please take a look at those now if you haven't already. Now I want to turn to Judy Hopfer-Deglin, who had an experience returning in 2012 with family members. You saw in the slideshow the poignancy of her mother, Charlotte Hopfer, who could not make that trip in 2012 because she was too frail. And if you caught the information at the bottom of the slide, Judy, that we had, your mother died exactly how many years after her mother and her sister Marianne were transported to Treblinka? Tell us about that.
It was on the anniversary of their deportation that she passed away. I think it was many years. They were deported in 1942.
42,
So that long.
2012, 60 years later.
60 years later. So yeah.
Right,
so
on the exact date.
on the exact
So
date.
you have a fascinating story. because it's your story that leads us to Alfei, to the town in Germany where your mother and your grandmother and her sisters are from, and where you made a return visit in 2012, all because of your mother's sister, Marianne, who perished at Treblinka. Tell us about your return.
So my mother's sister Mariana was only 15 when she was deported. This was an enormous lifetime loss for my mother. And we knew, we had heard in years past that there was a small memorial to Mariana in the town of Alzey. We had seen pictures of it. But in 2012, my father had passed away, and it was sort of a big coincidence. My father passed away. My mother's maiden name appeared in his obituary. And it had turned out that in the following years, the high school students in Alzey, in order to deepen their understanding of what transpired, were encouraged to find a story of a teenager in their town. And they, in 2011, they decided to reenact the life of my Aunt Mariana. They made this into a video. They were curious what had happened to Mariana's sisters. And because both of them had married after they came to the United States, they had not been able to locate them. But Dawn Colton-Mund, who was a teacher at the Elizabeth Langasser Gymnasium, had returned to the United States and came across my mother's name, her maiden name, Charlotte Strauss, in the newspaper in my father's obituary. And that was started the domino effect. The next thing I knew, several weeks later, I got a call. Actually, they contacted my husband at work. Gerhard Hoffman was looking for us. He was the principal at the high school, and he wanted to talk to me. And I thought to myself, I really don't speak enough German to make that happen. But it turns out that everybody there speaks English extremely well. And I was put in touch with them, and we were invited to Alzey to watch a screening of this video and to participate in the placing of Stolperstein, stumbling stones, in front of the house that my mother grew up in, and my aunt and grandmother, and where my grandfather Sally had a butcher shop. My mother was already pretty frail, but my sister and I, Ricky, she's listening in, we jumped on the opportunity to return there and be present for that. In the meantime, they had sent a copy, a DVD of this video for me to see, and I watched it with my siblings. And although the first copy I got did not have subtitles, but we have some, rudimentary, you can understand some German, really didn't need to be translated, because they reenacted the scene of my grandmother Ida and my Aunt Marianne, and my Aunt Mariana taking my mother to the train station to leave for the United States. So hugely emotional to watch that. And in September of 2012, my sister, myself, my brother-in-law, my daughter Hannah, and our cousin Glenn Orkin, we all went to Alzey for this ceremony. And it was a monumental trip. It was just.
Let me ask you, Judy, because you described it by quoting another family who had returned to Germany for the same kind of memorializations and commemorations. And this is the quote. And I want you to describe, again, as I was asking Romana and the others, the emotions that you felt returning to a place where there was such horror. And the quote you said was, "The indelible memories of the horror my family endured now mingle with the incredible kindness of a new generation." Just speak to that for a moment.
Well, when you arrive there, again, like Romana said, you have a lot of trepidation because of the history that's there for you. But the Germans that we spent time with, who took care of us, who let us stay in their homes, were clearly, wanting to engage in ongoing dialogue and forming relationships that were around what had happened to our families. I think it was you know, you would see this beautiful town. Alzey was totally spared of bombing. So it's very much like a medieval German town. Roman walls still exist around it. It's really quite lovely. Something my mother was not really able to impart to us, how beautiful it is there. And then at night, when you were sort of falling asleep in this beautiful place, I would be like thinking I'm 15 years old and hearing stormtroopers in the streets. So there was a lot of roller coaster emotions, but we were incredibly, you know, embraced by the Germans who were there. I thought the dialogues we had with them were honest and open. And we were impressed by the work the students had done on the film.
Thank you, Judy. And now let's turn to Gerhard Hoffman from Germany. Hi, Gerhard. It's good to see you. Unmute yourself. There you go. Hi. Hi. We want to tell everyone that you, from 2000 to 2018, were the principal of the Elisabeth Langasser Gymnasium in Alzey. It has about 1,500 students. And it was there in about 2010 that the film was made that Judy refers to, recreating the life of Judy's aunt, Marianne, who was deported to Treblinka. You are an academician who's retired now, but you're still lecturing at university. And so Gerhard, I'd like you to talk to us briefly about what is the curriculum like for teaching high school students in Germany about the Holocaust in the Nazi era, and what you feel are what they are getting from it, and how much of an imprint it is making on their decisions in life and how they're conducting themselves.
Sheila, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to today's conference. I really feel honored to be on this panel with you. I'd like to share with you my knowledge and experience from the perspective of school education in Germany. This is mainly the results of the, as you have said it, 18 years as a headmaster of a grammar school, and the 10 years before that, when I was responsible for the development and coordination of the curricula for the Ministry of Education in our country. So school in Germany is in the responsibility of the 16 federal states. So there might be big differences between our country and probably Bavaria or the North. I don't really know exactly. And especially sometimes it's very different from the US system as far as I came to know it. So I just want to tell you that our students, among the 14 compulsory subjects they have in school, 4 of them, namely German, history, social studies, and religious education or ethics, have the study of National Socialism and the persecution of Jews in Germany as compulsory subjects from grade 8 onwards. Grade 8 means the students are about 14 years old. Mind you, this is just the compulsory minimum standard. In addition, there are lots of interdisciplinary projects, study groups, school events, or competitions that go far beyond the content of school lessons. However, as I said, this varies from school to school depending on their profiles. But what you can say is, thus, one can be sure that every young person who has attended a school in Germany is fully informed about the events in the time of the Nazi dictatorship and the Holocaust, and knows how to classify them ethically and morally. Well, however, more important than the temporal or organizational requirements are, of course, the content-related pedagogic objectives of such teaching. For the subject of history, a guiding concept of the curriculum is the concept of Erinnerungskultur. It's a word difficult to translate. It means roughly memory culture or cultural heritage of remembrance. So all individuals in Germany who respect or who belong to this state have to identify or feel or have the feel or sense of belonging to the state, are always involved also in this memory and the values and obligations that are associated with it. Now to the school, well, the Elisabeth Langeser Gymnasium. Just to tell you, the school is named after a female writer born in Alzey. She was raised Catholic because her father was a Baptist Jew. She became pregnant from a relationship with a Jewish married man, and her daughter Cordelia was thus, according to Nazi arithmetic, 3/4 Jewish and considered fully Jewish. Therefore, she was deported to the KZ Theresienstadt, but survived the concentration camp. She later on, as Cordelia Edwardson, wrote a novel, Gebranntes Kind sucht das Feuer. I translate this with Burnt Child Searching Fire, in which she writes down her experiences in the time before, in, and after the concentration camp. Well, when you're headmaster of a school bearing such a name, this obliges. Already at the enrollment in our school, where the students are about 10 years old, our pupils receive an information folder containing texts by Elisabeth Langeser, as well as information about her time and her life. We have lots of projects in our school that, well, depend on the international connections that we have, including a partnership with a Polish school. And we also, for many years, have contemporary witnesses of the Shoah visiting us. So they were survivors of concentration camps or their descendants. All students of our school in year 11, that's when they are 17 years old, take part in these events, prepare them, and create an accompanying program for our guests then. As we have many projects and take part in competitions, it was just one day about 12 years ago when a colleague of mine teaching arts told me about the project he plans to do a video on Marianne Strauss. The idea of the competition was, do you find similar fates in your town, in your hometown, to the fate of Anne Frank? And so that's when they found that's when they started the idea of doing a video on the life of Marianne. The students did a lot of research on that and decided to make a film, make a video only with actors that belong to our school community. So all the people you see in that film, all of them are from our school. And I have to admit, it was quite hard for me to play the role of the headmaster who has to throw out Marianne from the German school. When I see the film today, this is always a scene where, well, that still touches me even today. There's just one person, one single person in that film who does not belong to our school. It's this Gestapo or SS man who stands in front of the butcher shop and throws out the sausages to the street. Because we thought that if this had been a colleague of our school, later on people would probably blame him for the role that he played. So it was the husband of one of our colleagues. Nobody really knew him from our students. So this is the story, how we came to the film. And I must say, when I look back to 18 years of headmaster of a gymnasium, maybe this was one of the most touching and impressive situations in our school when we, well, presented that video to the public.
Well, thank you, Gerhard, so much for telling us about that. And all of our participants must know that the film has been converted to YouTube and it is in the PDF attachment for your invitation. Look back at that if you haven't seen it. And we will be sending it again through the Federation, through Hadassah, because it is something so important. And thank you so much. Thank you so much. And now I want to turn to the American and Germanized person, Dawn Colton Mudd. Hi, Dawn. Dawn lives in the Cape now. She taught at Dennis Yarmouth High School from 2003 until her retirement, but she taught for a while in Germany. As a youngster, a graduate of Middlebury College in German Studies, then she got her master's there in German. She went to Germany as an exchange student, as a student, and then as a teacher, and coincidentally taught for a few years at the school with Gerhard Hoffman. And she was not there when they made the Marianne film, but when she was teaching her classes in the Cape Cod school, she contacted him, or he contacted her. They stayed in touch, and she found out, we have a film that you should show your students, because tell us, Dawn, you put on special programs combining German with history, with film, with survival of survivors. Tell us about your project coinciding with what happened in Alzey.
Great. Yeah. Like you said, I lived in Germany. I lived in the Alzey area for about 22 years. And the last 2.5 years that I was there, I did work at the ELG, that's what we call it, short form, ELG, that's the gymnasium. And I met Gerhard Hofmann. I had met him previously, and he asked me to come teach, which I did. And when I moved back here in 2003, of course, I switched from there teaching English to teaching German here. And I was given the task of developing further curriculum. My students were moving on in German. And so in the 4th year, I developed a curriculum. It's called German through history, or German history through film. And so we concentrate on surviving. I decided, in history, they've seen all of the World War II movies and they know what's going on. But I wanted to try to take a positive, if you can call it a positive, but a positive aspect of World War II, and that was the survivors. How does someone survive from that? That was the lesson that I wanted to do. So I started watching various films with my students, and I also created an exchange program, which we did with Elizabeth Langesser, because they were very well known to me. And so and in taking the students over there, that's when Gerhard came sometime after, maybe 2012, 13, he came to me and he said, oh, we have this film you might be interested in. The students here made it. And so I took it home and watched it. And this was, of course, the Marianne Strauss, and it fit perfectly in my curriculum that I was developing. But as we left, he said, one of the problems is, we know that the two sisters left and were able to leave and go to the US, but we haven't been able to find them. And I thought, well, can't be that hard to find them. And so I started researching on the internet, and that's when I came across this obituary, and Judy Deglin was listed kind of as a contact someplace. And so I looked up Deglin in Connecticut, and so I came up with the address, and then I contacted Elizabeth Langesser and said, here, I think, we found at least one of the sisters, and that's how that all started.
Well, that's terrific. And then you had your program. Did Judy come up for any program that you put on? Talk about that for a minute.
Right. After creating that curriculum, like I said, I also started an assembly that I put on twice with 2 years in between, just so that I could hit a wider group of students. It was voluntary for them to attend. And I invited then Judy up, and we also had another teacher at school whose parents were survivors of Dachau. And so we showed the film Marianne Strauss so that other students, not just my German students, could see it and experience it. And then Judy and her sister was there also one time, and this other art teacher that we had at school, and they were our panelists, just like here. And the students they talked a little bit about their history, and then students could ask questions about what it was like to grow up, as a child of survivors. So it also followed along my same, how does one survive these things?
Great. So thank you so much, Dawn, because you are the last stop on our roadmap to the students. So now we're going to turn to Mario Wagner. Are you here? So nice to have you. I know you're here. Mario,
Yes, I am.
you are the teacher of the 4 students that we're going to talk to now. You are at the Alzey Gymnasium. And just help us to introduce our students. First, we want to thank you for participating. You and the students did get some of our questions, and your students are very articulate in English, and know we're going to welcome them and understand them. And you had the opportunity to make a short film for us, which we treasure. And we're so happy that you're here in person today. So would you, I'll let you introduce the 4 students that we have, and then I will get to some of our questions for them. Okay.
Yes, thank you so much, Sheila, for having me and all of us here. And as you said at the beginning, these are troubled times, and I'm very happy that we can meet from different countries here in these troubled times as friends on this mutual level of understanding and cooperation, which I think is now more important than ever. So we all feel very honored to be participating in this project and to keeping the memories alive, and hopefully look or make sure that something like this is never going to happen again. Yes, I'm also very, very honored and privileged to introduce my students here for this project. I think one of them seems to have some problems logging into the conference, but I definitely saw 3 of them. We have students all from year 12 at our school, so they will be graduating next year. So they will be about 17 to 18 years old. So they have had history for about 5 years now. And we are actually talking about Nazi Germany at the moment. We haven't talked about the Holocaust yet, but we will do that in the upcoming weeks. We're talking about Nazi foreign policy now. So they are already informed a little bit about the subject. And I'm very pleased to introduce, of course, ladies first, Kara Czerny and Nina Günther, who are here, I think, from Alzey, and Cedric Heiss, who is also joining us for the conference. And I'm very happy that they can take part in.
Okay, that's wonderful. Well. We hope that Laura will be able to get on, but we're going to say hello to Kara and Cedric and Nina, and we're going to ask some questions that you had the grace to think about and answer for us. There's Cedric. And the first question that we asked you was if you could tell us something about what you learned about your family's connection to the Holocaust, whether you've ever talked to them about it, whether they've shared any details with you about their lives, their views, and their experiences during the Nazi era. Now, Laura is not here, and she told us that her grandmother was born in 1939 in what was then Poland, and she didn't know very much at first, but she told Laura that she did not like talking about it, and Laura sensed some reluctance and perhaps some shame. And then Kara, would you tell us what your experiences were with that question?
Yeah, so I talked to my grandparents to find out how they learned about the Holocaust, because they were born 1 and 8 years after the end of the war. And I was actually shocked to find out that they haven't learned about the Holocaust until they were adults already, because when they were children, they always had some rumors, but every time they asked their parents or their teachers, they were always told to stop asking inappropriate questions. So they never really could educate themselves. And just for me, the situation today is very different, because school puts an emphasis on the Nazi era. And also we have a deep understanding for the causes and also the consequences of it. We are encouraged to read books and watch documentaries. And I just think it's great that we have such a huge access to information.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, Cedric, I'm going to ask you this question. What are your thoughts about the way your schools and your government and your society in Germany as a whole educates you and the students about the history of the Nazi era and the Holocaust?
Yes, so in school we get a very detailed breakdown of the history of the rise of the NSDAP, so the party to power, and so Hitler's rise to power also, and the roots and causes in a broad and wider context of why this happened with the German population being not very happy after the First World War. So there being very much tensions leading to this rise of extremist party. Then in society, we get an early education that some symbols are forbidden. So all symbols used by Nazis earlier and what they mean. So there's also an open discourse about this. And then we have the Erinnerungskultur, which was already mentioned earlier. The culture of remembering and commemorating the victims and those who helped them.
Thank you. Nina, you also had an answer to that question.
Yeah, I also agree with Cedric that it's well known that it's an important topic in society, and that it's also made sure that it's in the curriculum and every student has to deal with the topic of the Holocaust at least once in their lifetime. And then it's also dealt very intensively within school. And in my case, we also did the topic in other subjects. Like, for example, we read The Boy in the Striped Pajamas in German lessons, or we watched Schindler's Liste and dealt with the topic in religion. And we also have the possibility in Germany to go to a lot of museums which deal with the topic, or to other memorials. And if you want to, you can really educate the topic, can educate yourself on a topic, but you need to want to.
Thank you. We asked a question about whether or not any of you have personally experienced or observed instances of racial discrimination or racial hatred directed against Jews or other groups. And Kara, you had an observation that you were not personally involved, but heard about, that involved anti-Semitic incidents. Would you tell us about that?
Yes, of course. So as you said, I personally grew up in an open and supportive environment. So I never personally observed such discrimination or hatred. But there was an incident at our school in a class 2 years above us, where a group of students started sending messages that included references to Adolf Hitler and the swastika. And when we found that out, we were all very shocked because we wouldn't have expected it. We are taught at school that any reference to Nazis can never be a joke, and they simply crossed a line with these jokes. And I think it's good that they really had to face serious trouble, and it just shows how easily sometimes the situation can escalate.
Thank you. This is a question that all of you have answered before. And let me ask, based on your learning and your understanding of German history and the Holocaust, do you think that Germany is now able to prevent any such thing from happening again? Why don't we start with you, Nina?
So yes, I think we have the possibilities to prevent it from ever happening again, but this should not mean that we can underestimate the danger of it happening again, which can be seen, for example, in the rise of populist parties in Germany again. But if we teach young people from a young age that they have the responsibility to prevent the past from ever happening again, then we can prevent it.
Okay, Kara?
Yes, I very much agree with Nina. We can never be too sure or become naive, but I personally think that we can prevent it because I believe in the strength of our democracy. And in Germany, we really feel this responsibility. It is still very present, and it's upheld in so many institutions like school, at home, in church, everywhere. And this is why I think we can now prevent it from happening.
Cedric?
Yeah, so I also agree with Kara and Nina. So, but yeah, never say never. There is no certainty, but it's a consensus society that the crimes committed in the Nazi era are nothing that should ever happen again. And only small minorities like neo-Nazis dream of German glory and domination or similar things of this past time, which we condemn as extremists. And yeah, all in all, the country is better equipped against such tragedy than other countries because of all this education and the culture of remembrance. But yeah, it's never 100% safe.
Thank you. This question was for Nina. We've seen a rise, as we've talked about, in neo-Nazi and other authoritarian movements in Germany and Western Europe, even America. Have you observed or heard about that? What do you think it's all about and why it's happening? Nina?
Yes, I've also heard about the topic, especially on the news, with, for example, 5 years ago, the Front National during the French elections. Now again, Marie Le Pen with the Rassemblement National during the French elections. For example, the FPÖ in Österreich or the Vox in Spain, which were all on the news. And I think the reason for this is maybe uncertain political situations, and then populist parties can profit of the fear of the people. And I think that this can cause the rise of the populist parties in Western Europe.
Okay. Cedric, we are reading, and Gerhard has told us in the past when we spoke with him that much of the anti-Semitism in Germany is coming from immigrant populations. What are the attitudes of the German young people about that and how it is being handled in Germany?
So most normal young people do not support such anti-Semitic thinking. And some also actively stand up against it, leading that others follow their example. So it's not necessarily tolerated, just like other forms of racism. But yeah, with young people, it may happen that they discriminate each other because of stupid things. But yeah, we also recently, there were protests in Berlin, the capital, that were yeah, anti-Semitic, which really is bad. So yeah, I also on the internet saw that there was a yeah, huge numbers of people spoke out against it. So there are people that are yeah, condemn it.
Okay. This next question is for Nina and Kara. For young people in Germany today, how does the importance of studying about the Nazi era and the Holocaust, as you're doing now with Mario, how does that compare in importance to the other issues that you and the German youth care about today? Nina?
Okay, so it's still a big part since society and school tells us about it, but it's not really a topic in everyday conversation, for example, with friends. But you're still confronted with the topic also due to the Stolpersteine in the cities or other memorials, which you always see. So it's still a very big and present topic in society.
Okay, Kara?
So I personally feel like there's a great interest to learn about the topic among students at school, even though it's not an everyday subject of discussion. But the topic is very present with us. For example, as well in the name of our school, Elisabeth Langes Gymnasium, and we have boards to commemorate the victims of the 2 world wars. So it always gets called to our minds. And especially after incidents like, for example, the Attentat in Halle in 2019, it's a big topic at home when we discuss with our parents how this can happen. And yeah, so it's always present in our minds, even though we don't discuss it with friends every day.
Okay. Nina, Romana mentioned, and we know that Germany has laws on preventing Holocaust denial, on preventing people from using Nazi displays. How do you think those laws are working? And how much does social media in your country play a role in the youth's attitudes and information?
Okay, so I think that with our history, laws like this are especially important, but there are also problems which occur. For example, that Nazis can use them to say that they're the ones infringed in their freedom of speech, which is of course not true, because the freedom of speech ends there where the dignity of other people is hurt. And this happens when they say that the Holocaust has never happened to victims, then their dignity is of course infringed. So I think it's important that we have these laws, and I think they are mostly working because there have been cases in which people have faced legal consequences because they have said something a bit like this. And I think it's especially with our history important that we keep these laws.
Okay, our last question is for all of you to answer. I know in my discussions with Mario, we shared information about Elie Wiesel and his works, and an important quote. What are your thoughts about this quote from Elie Wiesel? He said, "Let us remember, what hurts the victim most is not the cruelty of the oppressor, but the silence of the bystander." Let's start with you, Nina.
Yeah, so I of course agree with this statement, because the Nazi crimes were only possible due to the silence of the many people, which is a form of indirect support to them. So it's important that we stand up still today and learn from the past to prevent it from ever happening again, so that we show civil courage if we see anti-Semitism or other discriminations against others, and that we show the victims that they're not alone and the oppressors that they cannot get away with it.
And Cedric, your reaction?
Yeah, so no matter why some people discriminate others, there are always bystanders. And if you're lucky, someone actively steps in, but that does not always happen. So it takes courage to step in, but it is important that people step in and speak out against injustice.
Okay, and Cara, your words?
Yeah, so I'm convinced that it's really our responsibility to show courage and stand with the oppressed, support the victims of continuous discrimination and hate even today. And I believe that the tolerance and the unity of millions of people really is stronger than the hate of just a few. And each of us, we can personally make a change, and we have to guarantee the well-being and safety of every human being, regardless of their religion and their origin. So yes, we have to stop being silent, and we have to start being loud wherever we encounter injustice. So I totally agree with this quote.
Thank you so much. There's so much we can get to. We're so happy that you came on our program. Thank you, Mario, for introducing us to the students. Thank all of our panelists for leading us through this, the slideshow and the roadmap to the students. We're now going to turn to our Yom HaShoah memorial and candle lighting service. But before, I want to leave you with a quote from Germany's president in 1985. He said, "The young and old generations can and must help each other to understand why it is important to keep memories alive. Anyone who closes his eyes to the past is blind to the present." And now, Rabbi Shine.
Shalom, guten Abend. I'm Rabbi Susan Shine, director of Zach's Hillel House and a college chaplain at Connecticut College. My mother, Helga Milstock Shine, who died 7 months ago, Zichrona Livracha, may her memory be for a blessing, and her mother, Adolfina Milstock Bondi, experienced some of the horrors that followed the Anschluss, or Nazi annexation of Austria. The kindness of others helped my mother and grandmother to obtain visas, ship passage, and an American sponsor, enabling them to flee Vienna and to arrive in New York City in December 1939. Many of their relatives were not as fortunate. Today, we will light 6 yahrzeit candles, one for each 1 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust. We light these candles to continue the light of memory, honoring those whose dreams, hopes, and lives were snuffed out before they could fully live. We light these candles for those for whom there is no one to mourn, entire families annihilated in unmarked graves. We light these candles for the righteous among the nations, named and unnamed, who risked their lives to save others. We light these candles for the brave soldiers who liberated the camps, buried the dead, and served in order to put an end to tyranny and oppression. We light these candles for the 6 million Jews and millions of non-Jews who perished in an unimaginable system of human degradation and destruction. And we light these candles for those who today are living under the yoke of oppression, where war wages and the threat of genocide remains real. Each candlelighter will recall the names of loved ones who fled as a refugee or who perished in the Holocaust. The candlelighters are Judy Hopford Deglin, Helen Elperina, Rosa Drobiarts Goldblatt, Mona Levin, Romana Strachlitz Primus, and Vivian Zoe.
I light this candle in remembrance of my maternal grandmother, Ida Rosenthal Strauss, and her daughter, my aunt Mariana Strauss, who perished shortly after deportation to Treblinka in September of 1942. Mariana was only 15 years old. Their loss weighed heavily on my mother, Charlotte Strauss Hopfer, all throughout her life, a loss that has persisted into the next generation.
I light this candle in the memory of my parents, Oleg Elperin and Doran Alabotsky, my husband's parents, Lilia Beckman and Yefim Rabinovich, who all survived Holocaust as children. And in memory of the countless members of their families who perished in Minsk ghetto and other places.
I remember my father and my mother, Hanandel and Sofia Drobiaj, and my uncle Micha Drobiaj, who survived the war. My father and my uncle survived multiple brutal work camps and concentration camps in Poland and Germany. I also remember my grandparents and other relatives who I never knew because they were murdered by the Nazis.
I remember my mother, Minna Gastfreund, who survived Auschwitz and its death march. My father, Kalman Gastfreund, and his younger brother, Morris, who survived several concentration camps, and countless members of their families who perished in the Holocaust.
I remember my parents, Rose and Sigmund Strachlitz, and I remember their parents, their siblings, my father's first wife, and countless other relatives, all murdered by the Nazis.
I remember my mother, Ruth Carliner Friedman, who survived 3 concentration camps, including Auschwitz and its death march. My father, Jacob Friedman, who escaped to Palestine at age 14 and then joined the British Army as a translator and interrogator. My maternal grandparents, Irma Birm Carliner and Kurt Carliner, who were murdered at Auschwitz. My cousins, Walter and Herbert Carliner, who were on the St. Louis, survived and arrived in the US through Florida. My uncle Heinz Carliner, my mother's brother, who escaped Germany to England at age 14 with the Kinder transport.
As I chant the El Mole Rachamim on behalf of the 6 million, I want to recall especially the half-brother and the half-sister that I never met, but who were murdered at Auschwitz. El Malay Rachamim, Shochen Bamromim, Hamatzei Menucha Nechona Takakan Peyashchina, Memala Kirashim Utorim, Gezora Kiamasirim, Et Nishmot, Kol Achenu B'nei Yisrael, Anashim, Nashim, V'tav, Sheneherku, V'shenitbechu, V'shenisrefu, V'shenechnechu, V'gan Eden Temenuchatam, Ana Bal Rachamim, Hasdirem, V'seichekan Alpecha V'yolamim, Utzror B'tror Chaim Es Nishmotehem, Adonai Unachalatam, V'yenuchu V'shalom Al Mishkavotehem, Minamar. Amen.
Yit Gadal,
Auschwitz,
V'yit Kadash,
Lodz,
Shmei Rabbah,
Panan,
V'yalma Divarach
Babi
Hirutei,
Yar,
V'yamlich Malchutei,
Majnek,
B'chayechon Uv'yomechon,
Birkenau,
Uv'chaye Dekol Beit Yisrael,
Kovno,
Ba'agala Uvizman Kariv,
Yanavska,
V'imru,
Amen.
Amen.
Yehei Shemei Rabbah Mevarach Le'olam Olamei Almaya,
Yid Barach V'yishtabach,
Trajanstadt,
V'yit Pa'ar, V'yit Romam,
Buchenwald,
V'yit Naseh, V'yit Hadar, V'yit
Treblinka,
Aleh, V'yit Halal,
Vilna,
Shmei Dekudasha,
Berihu, Bergen-Belsen,
Le'ela,
Mauthausen,
Min Kol Birchata V'shirata,
Dachau,
Tushbechata V'nechemata,
Minsk,
Di Almiran Bialma,
Warsaw,
V'imru,
Amen. Yehei Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya, V'chaim Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen. Oseh Shalom Bimromav, Hu Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen.
Thank you all for coming. To end on a somewhat hopeful note, Macron won the French election. We have heard this afternoon about the conflicting emotions of children of survivors who returned to Germany and about attempts to educate about the Holocaust in hopes that that will help prevent another one. Attempts to educate through film, through regular curriculum, and through special projects like the Mariana Strauss films. We have heard from dedicated educators and from 3 truly articulate students. Let us all ask ourselves, are we personally doing enough to foster appreciation of cultural, religious, and racial diversity? Are we stepping in, as Cedric has said we must? After the benediction, please stand if you are able for the partisan song, which will conclude our program. We were there, we are here, and we will not be bystanders.
At this moment, as we conclude this Yom HaShoah program, we remember and we mourn. But remembrance is not for us alone. It is not enough that we remember. The world must remember. and God must remember. We remember the innocents whose blood was shed simply because they were who they were. We remember the Jews of all the lost shtetls and towns of Europe who cannot be forgotten. Their cries, dear God, are forever carried on the winds. May those cries reach you, Master of the Universe. And just as God once promised never again to destroy the world with a flood, may God promise once again, this time never again, to allow destruction by fire. And as we conclude on this day, as we have learned this day of the growth of Jewish life in Germany once again, and the education of students in Germany as well as in our country, we are impressed by the students who joined us from Germany today to the realities of the Shoah in their own personal lives and how the Holocaust has had an impact upon their own future. As leaders who can teach the responsibilities to prevent a Shoah from ever happening again, to stand up with courage against anti-Semitism, discrimination, and hatred against all people. From these students, we gain inspiration. May we hold fast to the message that they taught us of wisdom and insight, that the world is filled with wonders, miracles, and hope. With our prayers for a messianic age of peace between all nations and all peoples throughout the world. And let us say, Amen.
Sag kein Mal, als du gehst dem letzten Weg, hat Himmel bleie verstehen, bleie Tag. Kommen wird nach unser ausgebänkte Show. Svet der Poikt und unser Trat mer seinen do. Kommen wird nach unser ausgebänkte Show. Svet der Poikt und unser Trat mer seinen do. Never say that you have reached the very end, when leaden skies a bitter future may portend. For the hour for which we yearn will yet arrive, and our marching steps will thunder we survive. For the hour for which we yearn will yet arrive, and our marching steps will thunder we survive.